August 20th, 2021, and we welcome everybody by video conference. We will skip the pledges of allegiance this morning just because we are virtual now, and that makes it a little difficult to do the pledges virtually. So we will now have roll call.
Chair Sarah Oates.
Present.
Martha Gill Reed Lynch.
Present.
Chance Bolton.
Present.
Clayton Black.
Present.
Rolando Castro.
Present.
Paola Escalante Castillo.
Present.
Mark McAnally.
Present.
Stephanie Robinson.
Present.
Lisa Sprinkle.
Present.
Very good. Everyone is present. So of course we had our May meeting in person and it felt like we were kind of returning back to a little bit of normalcy, but and up until a few weeks ago, this meeting was scheduled to be in person. But sort of as the meeting got closer, we started hearing about what was happening in all the local hospitals and, you know, with the kids going back to school, and we just felt like it would be a more conservative approach to hold this meeting virtually. So I want to thank everybody for their flexibility on that, and also staff for switching gears at the last minute and making this happen virtually. So thank you to everyone who made this happen. I've asked Ms. Sprinkle to open the meeting this morning with our mission moment.
Okay. When I was first asked if I wanted to be appointed to the TALCB, I said, the what? I was not an appraiser and had very limited experience in the real estate field. What would I have to contribute to this board? At my first board meeting, I was overwhelmed by the acronyms and the discussion overall. I thought I finally might have bitten off more than I could chew. As the board meeting went on, I realized the board members were dedicated professionals. Now that was something I could relate to. I had been a civil trial and litigation paralegal for 32 years. I had been very active in promoting and protecting my profession. I had also been active in making sure that others passing themselves off as paralegals and hurting the public were exposed. Now I could relate to the work of the TALCB. I'm still having trouble with it. After a few more board meetings, I realized I did have something to contribute. I will continue on this board as an ardent supporter of Texas appraisers and to continue to protect the Texas consumer. I believe both are very, very necessary. Thank you for this appointment and this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I appreciate those words, and we are glad to have you and happy that you're on our team.
Thank you.
I will, at this time, I just wanted to make note that we are going to hold off on agenda item number 12, which is executive session, until after we've had the chance to discuss some of the items later in the agenda, 16 through 20. And if we don't have a need for it, then we may not have an executive session today. But as always, if any board member would ever like to pause a discussion and to get legal counsel, we always have that option throughout the meeting. This takes us to agenda item number 4, which is public comments. It's an opportunity for anyone to comment on items that are not part of today's agenda. So if you want to speak on a matter that is on the agenda, you can do so at that time. If you're a member of the public wishing to speak on a non-agenda item or an agenda item, and you haven't signed up, you can email general.counsel@talcb.texas.gov. We have not received any requests from members of the public to speak at this time. That will take us to agenda item number 5, the ratification of the record of the May 14th, 2021 board meeting as approved for posting on the website by the Secretary of the Board, that can be found in your materials starting on page 11. Does anyone have any changes to the official record? If not, I will hear a motion.
Madam Chair, I move that the board ratify the minutes of the May 14th, 2021 board meeting.
I will second.
We have a motion by Ms. Reed Lynch and a second by Ms. Robinson. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes. That takes us to agenda item number 6, committee reports. And we will start with the executive committee. The report is on page 17 in your materials. So the only thing I really wanted to highlight from that was that we did discuss the availability of funds for board members to go to the Fall Aero Conference, and that's in DC in mid-October. So I'm happy to report that I will be attending along with Ms. Escalante Castillo and Ms. Robinson. And from staff, Kat Santos, Melissa Train, and Tony Slagle will also be going. I think it's a great opportunity for us to get together with the other people that do the things that we do. So I'm glad that we were able to make that happen, and hopefully we can all do that in a safe way come October. And I appreciate the board members that want to go and explore this more. Agenda item number 7 is the report by the Education and Licensing Committee. Mr. Castro, the report is included in our materials on page 21. Is there anything that you want to highlight for us? You're muted, Rolando.
That. How about I get off of that? So really all we were talking about was just updating the online tools in order to enable the ACE providers for payments. And that's just an ongoing process right now. I believe staff has kept us in the loop on just making sure that that is continuing the task that they have, and it's just a matter of I don't know. It's a technology thing. So hopefully, as time goes on, we'll be getting updates on that. The other thing, I guess, is that we're looking at exam pass rates again. We've just been going back and forth on how to quantify the exam pass rates and just making sure that we have make sure we know exactly, just keeping up to date with them. There's really, unfortunately, not any one particular item that you can point to that gives you any sort of I don't know, anything on that. So we're just continuing to watch it, but we're trying our best to see if we can find any particulars that we can find, as in age or amounts of times you've taken the test or anything that we could find. So that's more of a time issue, and we've seen exam pass rates go up, which is good in the last 2 quarters. So that's a good sign, and hopefully it's a sign of things to come, and that it's just something that just kind of eases into just a normal pass rate. So other than that, if Ms. Robinson, is anybody that wants to highlight anything else that I've missed?
Sure, I'll jump in. I did, as a follow-up to our committee meeting, meet with the IT staff, and I appreciate the IT staff for being available for that meeting, just to dig a little bit deeper on where we stood with launching the payment system. They were so gracious and provided very detailed, open information, and they have worked really hard to make this happen. And I just wanted the board to be aware of that it's really not just something they kind of put on the back burner. They really have developed a lot up to this point. Where we left off, there was just a little tiny piece where we were just this close away from launching. So I'm anxious to get updates from them maybe later on in the board meeting on if we were able to close that gap. But they did an extraordinary job getting where they are. And so I just want to thank the staff for doing that, and thank them for their time for being a little bit more detailed in our follow-up meeting. But thank you, Rolando, for giving me that chance to speak.
Yeah, no problem. And the one other thing, I guess, is that the one thing overarching everything that just hasn't done anything as of yet is Berea. There is still no programs that have been accepted or approved by the AQB. So really, even though Texas has adopted it and fully, it's just, we're just waiting on a program that we could vet and look at and see. So as of now, there have been numerous other states that have updated their or that have adopted PREA as an alternative for the experience credit. And so, I mean, I think there's about half of them that still haven't gotten to that point yet. So, and then there's also some states that are partial credit or that kind of thing. So maybe Ms. Oates, if when you go to the Aero conference, if you could maybe tap some of those other board members from the other states and see kind of where they stand on it, maybe that would be helpful. Ms. Robinson, same with you, and just try to see, and especially from those states that maybe have gotten it for, that have gotten given a partial credit or just partially implementing it, kind of how they got to that point, just to get an opinion, another opinion, and another perspective on how they see PREA.
I think that's a fantastic idea, and there's a breakout session for just board members, and so I think that's a really great idea. I'll make sure to bring that up so that we can discuss it, because I think you're right. It would be helpful if more states adopted it fully. Then it would incentivize the providers to launch into this, which has to be a huge undertaking on their part. So I think that's a great idea. And Ms. Robinson, I wanted to thank you for digging into that IT issue. When Mr. Castro mentioned it at the beginning of his report, I thought, I feel like I've heard this topic several times, and I'm kind of surprised that it's still lingering. So I appreciate the fact that you took that next step and dug into it. So thank you for doing that. And hopefully during staff reports, maybe we can get an update on that. So
it is definitely my pleasure. I think when we first made the commitment to do this for our applicants, we all were under the impression, staff, including myself, that this would be an easy thing to just kind of get done quickly. But unfortunately, sometimes when you're working with technology integration, particularly on an older system, you run into things that are just simply unexpected. And I think that's where we are. So again, I commend the staff for continuing to fight through that to make this happen. And I'm very confident they will be able to launch it very soon. So happy to have done that.
thank you. I appreciate that very much. Thank you, Mr. Castro and Ms. Robinson. The next agenda item is Enforcement Committee. Mr. Bolton, that report is in our materials on page 25. Is there anything that you would like to highlight for us?
Yes, thank you. The one thing that I'd like to, first of all, the staff gave some data regarding the new board pick review process. And we had a great discussion about it, and I think everybody agreed, staff and board members alike, that that this program is off and running to a great start. So I appreciate all the people involved in their efforts to get us in a good, in a good place. And then I would like to point out that we do have some proposed rule amendments that we'll be looking at later in the meeting. These are in regard to it basically looking at contingent dismissals as being finalized when that agreement is made, not when the respondent does what they agree to. So, and what that does, that kind of more accurately reflects that the case is wrapped up, and it will, I mean, and so the indication will be that things are faster, but it really is more accurate in the reporting.
Wait, can you clarify that for me?
I'm sorry?
Can you clarify that for me?
Well, in the current system, when a contingent dismissal is the recommendation in a case, then they go and they have, and as long as there's an agreement from the respondent, then the case will be resolved in our books once the respondent has finished the prescribed items.
So like they have 6 months to take a class or something like that.
Yeah, or mentoring or whatever it may be. Now, once we get to the contingent dismissal portion, or where it's agreed to, then we would, in our records, indicate that the case is over with.
Oh, because it stays like in our tracking system is what you're saying, as an open case until that, oh, okay, I get that.
Melissa, you might help me out here a little bit if I'm not explaining this very well.
Yeah, so Melissa, where is that, where are those numbers that would reflect that?
So it would be in our case resolution. So for each contingent dismissal that we have right now, we're eating about 30 to 40 days for them to finish whatever contingencies they have. So like Mr. Bolton said, if we are able to close them as soon as we come to agreement, that'll save us about 30 to 40 days on each contingent dismissal.
Okay, and so but where is that time being tracked? Like in the reports that we get, where would we see that time frame? And
you would see that time frame in the average days to resolve complaint cases.
oh, wow, no kidding. Yeah, that doesn't make sense at all to have that in there if the ball is sort of in their court and we're just waiting on them to do their thing. So I'm glad to know that. Thank you for fixing that.
And I know we'll dig a little deeper later on in the board meeting for this particular topic. But we are still going to ensure that they've completed what we've agreed to, right? There is still a way to do that even after we've showed the closure on the report?
Yes.
Okay, all right,
Yeah,
thank you.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you for digging into that and fixing that. I'm sorry, Mr. Bolton, you may proceed.
That's really all I have. If any of the enforcement committee members have anything they'd like to highlight, please do so.
Very good, thank you. Now we'll have the budget committee report. Ms. Robinson, it's on page 29 of your materials.
Yes.
If there's anything you'd like to highlight for us?
A couple things I'd like to highlight. First of all, we have a rock star team. That's everywhere from our leadership, our commissioner, deputy commissioner, our amazing leadership that Ms. Tran has given us through efficiencies and changing internal processes, our finance team. Man, they have really killed it. Okay, so let me take us back a little bit. When we first approved this budget, those of you that were on the board at the time, it was approved. I approved it reluctantly because it was a $500,000 deficit, operating deficit. And with the information we had at the time, we just had to move forward and approve it. It is what it is. But I was very focused on making sure that although we approved it, that we fixed that before the end of the fiscal year, because I did not want us to show that on the books because it's just not fiscally responsible in my opinion. So made that very clear up front. And I tell you, the team has just ran with it. Like I said, from the top of the leadership to middle to management to everybody has just done a great job. We are now sitting where we have collected, I believe, 98% of our revenue already as of June that we had projected, which means that by the end of the fiscal year, we will have possibly surpassed where our revenue goals were. We have decreased our expenses. I believe we should be at about 86% or so on our expenses right now. I believe we're in the 60s. Correct me if I'm wrong. So we've increased revenue, we've decreased expenses significantly, which in the end will eat up that deficit, that operating deficit that we approved originally. So thank you so much to the staff for everything you've done. I know it was a lot of hard work, crazy long hours, Ms. Tran, that I love you for, girl. But y'all did a great job, and I'm so pleased about that. So I did want to highlight and thank the staff so much for their hard work and the leadership for their hard work as well. I know we had a budget meeting for the fiscal year 2022 during our last committee meeting. We made a few tweaks to it from the last time. I think you guys have seen it, so it will be discussed later on an agenda item today, and so we can dig a little deeper on that as we get to it. But my biggest thing is that I just want to really thank the staff for closing out this particular fiscal year very well financially. So we are a stronger program because of you guys. So thank you very much. Any other board members? Would any other board members like to chime in, or the committee members? Excuse me.
We're lucky to have you, Steph.
Oh,
Yeah.
Thank you.
happy to serve. Happy to serve. But
And
kudos, kudos to the staff for
Yeah,
sure.
This is Clayton.
Yeah.
I would echo what you said, Stephanie. Staff has just always done a fantastic job, presenting things to us and makes it a lot easier for us to make decisions. But yeah, thanks to everybody as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
And I appreciate, Ms. Robinson, I've said this before, your leadership in that area. And I think that, questioning some things has kind of prompted staff to go like, okay, how can we get creative, and for everybody to kind of work as a team to get creative. One of the things was getting a grant for that open position, just things like that. So, when we stop and bring it up, I think it's helpful for everybody and for everybody to understand what's actually going on. So I certainly appreciate you, and I appreciate staff for working with you to make that happen. Thank you to everybody.
Pleasure.
Great. The AMC Advisory Committee did not meet prior to this board meeting, so there's no report from Ms. Reed Lynch. If something comes up, I hope that they will have the opportunity to meet before our November meeting. This takes us to agenda item number 10, the staff reports on agency operations, initiatives, and statistical data. These start on page 33 in your materials.
Fantastic. Okay, I will start. Chelsea Buckholz, Commissioner. Tony will follow up. Tony Slagle, Deputy Commissioner, and we will note some highlights that are in your reports and included in the executive summary. But if you have questions of any of our staff related to these reports, they're all on standby, ready to answer those questions. So in May, I welcomed you back to in-person meetings. And then here we are in August. I'm very sorry that we're back to virtual, but thankful that we have this option remaining. Also looking back at what I presented to you in May, I reported that we would return to the office slowly over the summer with the goal of being back by Labor Day, which will be here before we know it. As of last week, I slowed this process to create more flexibility for our staff to work from home until this current surge is behind us. So while we hope to be back to the office, having implemented our new remote work policy by Labor Day, I've bumped that to October 1st. And that October 1st deadline is fluid, of course. We are making decisions as we receive more information. I wish this pandemic was behind us, but we remain diligent to keep our staff safe. As I mentioned, you have staff reports before you behind item 10. I want to highlight a few things from those reports and then just provide a few operational details for you. I'm going to skip customer service because that is really Tony's expertise, and so he's going to highlight that for you in just a minute. I did want to mention on the education front, I know it was mentioned earlier that the board is watching the exam pass rates for Texas and across the country. Those are included in, not across the country, but for Texas, it is included on page 38 of your materials. This is a fairly new addition. I think it's a good way for you as a board to monitor this, which I know you have been, watching and discussing over the last months. On the licensing front, our application numbers are up, but our processing time is down. I think you agree with me that this is a very good trend that we'd like to continue. We're also nearing completion of the requirements gathering phase for our new licensing database. I think I've mentioned this to you over the last couple of board meetings. This is a project that's funded on the TREC side, but it will greatly increase efficiencies for the board and for board staff. I reported at the commission meeting last week that we would be ready for an RFO by the end of the calendar year, but we have had a few new discoveries between last Monday and today, and it looks like that may be delayed by a couple of months. We need a specific type of review by our basically state IT department, the Department of Information Resources, and that review will extend that timeline. It shouldn't extend the overall timeline of the project, but it will mean that we're a little bit delayed in that RFO. Also wanted to mention that, and this has been mentioned just previously, that we are about to start year 2 of the ASC grant. We are concluding our first project for this first year of the grant period to establish a complaint portal. That should be ready by the end of the month, and we will let you know as soon as that launches so that you can see this good work. That will allow for an electronic submission of a complaint through a portal. In year 2, we will pursue an application portal, and that will include an interactive experience log. And that means that for applicants, they will be able to document their experience as they receive it, rather than submitting a complete experience log. It will also automate the calculation of the count of experience hours. Right now we receive a PDF document and then calculate those hours. So this will create great efficiency for us and for applicants. I'm excited about that work. And of course, it also mentioned is that through this grant, we are funded for an additional attorney position, which we have posted for that position already, and that will greatly help the work of the board. And Ms. Robinson discussed our budget, where we are with our budget, but I wanted to just point you to page 45 of our materials. You'll see the budget status as of the end of June. And if you compare total expenditures and total revenue, you can see that the efficiencies we've implemented over this year have worked. And we're basically flush with our spending, revenue and spending, which was not as good as we expected, or is better than we expected to be. That's better said that way. Also, if you look at our proposed budget for 2022, which is a separate document that was sent to you under separate cover, that gives you a fuller picture of where we will be at the end of this year, which we will conclude at the end of August. And in November, you will have a better snapshot of how we've closed out that year. But if you look on those, on that document, on page 3 of that document, you'll see that our projected actuals for 2021 for revenue versus expenses, there's a differential of about $30,000, which is not a rounding error in my own personal budgeting, but is basically just a rounding when we're talking about millions. So that is a sign of great success. I'm very proud of the work of staff to get there. It's a significant win. Lastly, our complaints. These continue to increase. We're watching it closely, and I see this as our first priority for potential increase in spending should we need it. I do not believe we're at that point, but we're monitoring that very closely. And it's one of the reasons why I'm grateful for our current budget position, is that we have now the flexibility to increase that funding should we need it. I mentioned that we have an attorney posting open to hire that grant funded position. We also have a posting for an appraiser investigator to fill an open position that was made open by a recent retirement. We welcome your sharing those postings with your networks. This is a hard time to bring in quality applicants. There's a lot of available jobs, and so we welcome any help you can provide in that. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Chelsea, I have a question with regard to the attorney position. Where do we stand? Are we looking at applicants, or?
We are. It's been posted. Melissa may be able to provide us with a better update of where we are. I do not believe it's been posted for very long.
Yeah, it's just been a few weeks, but we plan to reach out and schedule and do interviews in the next week.
Okay, thanks.
Let's see. A couple of questions on the transition back to work. We pushed that back to around October 1st, which I think is good considering our circumstances. Have we gotten any, what are our plans right now? How are we monitoring the COVID situation as a program? How are we looking, how are we making those decisions?
Do you mean if there's like a report of a COVID case in the agency or
Or
just how are we?
Just overall speaking, how are we making the decision on when to come back? Like, are we looking at certain data reports that's provided by the governor's office on the increases? Are we looking at medical reports that have come in for the state? How are we making those decisions?
I have primarily been looking. Oh, did someone else say something?
I just said that was a good question. Sorry.
Oh yeah, that is a great question. I have primarily been. I'm taking a very holistic approach.
Okay.
I have repeatedly looked at the data that Travis County puts out. Right now, we're at stage 5, which is the highest stage you can be at. So that's a huge driver. And then just a little bit softer data is the going back to school and the unknowns associated with that. But primarily, we have no ICU beds available in the Austin area, or very few, and being at stage 5. Those are the two drivers. Also, it is the way that we made this decision this time was to convene our senior team and take the temperature of staff. We have been, and really we only made that decision last week. We had been pressing on in this transition. We have rolled out a remote work plan that really puts only about 50% of our staff at the office at any given point post-COVID. And we ask folks to try out their new schedules and get comfortable with those so that we started in earnest after kids went back to school, so after Labor Day. And because of the increase in cases, what we did is just push back the completion of that transition. And we're not prohibiting people from coming to the office, but we're saying you have as much flexibility as you need. Don't feel the need to follow your schedule in terms of where you're working, and just coordinate with your supervisor.
Okay. And we're still getting great performance from our staff remotely, and still no issues there? Are they, as far as morale, and because I know, working from home also affects the, camaraderie and the collaboration component of being in the office. So are we still seeing pretty good performance from our staff at home?
We're seeing great productivity. In fact, in some departments, our productivity is higher with folks at home than it is in the office.
Okay.
I am sensing just a very there are some issues, I would not say with performance, but I think we're seeing that our staff is very tired, not so much from being home or being at the office, but from being in a pandemic.
Right.
And that's coming across of just I've seen some additional contention between staff, where people are not at their best, and so we're spending a lot of time there. I'm expressing my expectations and making sure that people know that even when we're not at our best, we will be held accountable to how we treat each other.
Right.
Excellent.
Chelsea,
Excellent.
This is Clayton. I wanted to springboard on that, and I was actually just going to ask the same question. I was on mute, so thank you for asking that, Stephanie, because I was very curious as well. So can you kind of roughly then, we're shooting for October 1st back to office. What is the percentage right now? I mean, roughly, that comes into, actually physically goes into the office and then that works remotely? I'm just trying to get a feel for it as well. I know what's going on here in Midland and Beaumont because I've been there recently, but I haven't been to the Metroplex or, San Antonio, Austin in a while, not since May. I'll be in Houston September 4th for the season opener with Texas Tech and U of H. I'll find out there. But yeah, What,
Sure.
I'm just curious what, the rationale, or I'm sorry, what the percentage of, people that do come in, you say that you're not restricting them. So that's great. I'm just kind of curious how many come into the office, how many stay home, and if that's just generally reflective of Austin, if you can expand on that a
Sure.
little bit.
I knew that when we added flexibility and allowed people to make those decisions, that we would have a workforce that was primarily at home. And that's exactly what's happened. So almost everyone who has that flexibility to stay home has taken us up on that for the most part. We have a team of folks who come and process the mail every day. So that's a team of 3. We also have a handful of folks from our finance team that come in and process what we get in the mail, like the finances. So I would say we only have middle of last week and this week to really collect that data. But I would say we've had between 10 and 20 people in the office of our 140-ish staff.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, thanks.
That's both agencies, but most people are at home if they can be.
Sure. So generally speaking, Austin's pretty well shut down. Is that a fair enough statement?
I would say that it is that we have less consistency today than we have ever had in the pandemic. So while a year, March 13th, a year and a half ago through, I don't know, maybe spring of this year, we were pretty much shut down. And then we were very much open, and that increased our staff in the office. And so we would have maybe, there's been days where we've maybe had 25% of our workforce in the office, maybe. But in this current surge, I can't find any consistencies.
Yeah.
At the office, we've created that flexibility to keep our staff safe. I know other agencies are doing that. I meet every other week with the executive directors of the other licensing agencies. All of them have created, at the least, created flexibility, at the most, sent everybody home. I know there are other state agencies who have not practiced that. I think the AG's office continues to implement their plan to be back at the office by September. I'll double check that, but there's no real consistency.
Oh, that's good enough. Thanks. I didn't mean to get us too far off track. Thanks for speaking to that, though. I was just curious.
Sure.
Clayton, I would say that all the schools in Austin are open and going. So as far as that part of the city, that's happening.
And there's no contention around it.
It's good to know.
Right.
Thanks.
And everyone is perfectly aligned on the kids going back to school and how they go back to school and all that.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Obviously, I'm kidding. So I will say from the staff reports, one thing that I sort of like to keep an eye on is our total number of licensees, because it's such an important component of our budget, and what we project our revenue to be is so important to what we're spending. And so, those trends are something that I really keep an eye on. So of course you want to look at how many, exams are being taken, or the first step, I guess, in the process is the actual application. So you look at that, and then you go, okay, who's going on to the next step, taking the exams? And then we look at our total license numbers. And so I was looking at, there's been a pretty significant jump in exams for licensed residential. So we had last year 70 that had taken the exam up to this point in the year, and this year we have 114. So that's a huge jump. Then you look at applications received, and this year we've received 700 applications for trainee license compared to 376 last year. So that really tells us there's a lot more people coming into the profession. But then you go to our total licensee numbers, and that's on page 39, and you look a year ago what our total general residential and licensed residential is, and then trainees are reported separately, and those numbers haven't moved. So that's telling me that, yes, we're bringing new people into the profession, but there are also an equal number of people leaving the profession. And so which tells me that we really do need to continue to push to make sure that there's low barriers to entry so that we're bringing people in, because we're going to have to offset this, attrition as well. So just, I wanted to bring that up to you, Stephanie, especially, as y'all contemplate that is on the revenue side, that to just, we'll keep an eye on that and make sure that we're being reasonable in our revenue projections and our growth projections. I think that, obviously we have another fee increase coming in January. And so that, that's something to consider. But as far as total number of licensees, we just want to keep an eye on that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'll definitely keep that in mind as we continue to meet. And I know Renata's team does a great job of presenting that data during every meeting on, how many licensees we're getting in and that sort of thing, so we can help project a little better. But I appreciate you bringing that up. I'll make sure we continue to keep that as the forefront.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
this is Mark here. Just to echo your observations about trends, and I'm sure that TALC has even more current numbers than what I remember, but years ago, I'd say 5-10 years ago, we looked at these numbers because this total number around 6,400, 6,500 has stayed consistent. But what we were also seeing is the natural aging workforce of the appraisal profession. And at least about 10 years ago, well over 50% of the licensed and certified appraisers were over 50 years old. So you can advance that 10 years forward now, and you're looking at 60-year-olds. And so even though that is a budget item to consider, it is refreshing to see that there is a significant jump in the applicants, but what they're going to do is neutralize this graying of the profession.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's probably something else for the budget committee and for Renata's team to, just keep an eye on. What I'm sure that we have that data of the age of our licensees and consider that as part of their projections as well. I would guess the average appraiser probably doesn't retire until what, 85?
At least.
Okay, very good. Does anybody, are we going to hear from Tony on the customer service side?
Before we go,
anybody else have any questions for the commissioner before we turn it over to Tony?
yes, Madam Chair, I'm sorry to interrupt. Before we turn it over, I did want to talk a little bit about enforcement. I know that we're working on the complaint portal to be set up so that we can kind of streamline that. And then I know that we have an increase. As we're developing the complaint portal, one of the things that consistently stays in the back of my mind is to make sure that as we're handling complaints coming in, that we're keeping our eye open for civil rights violations. As an industry, I know as a nation, that is an issue for some minorities who are getting appraisals that are less than what they feel they're valued. And I don't want us to forget that that is happening on a national level. I don't know the extent in the state of Texas, and I would be open to doing some research and more digging in a little deeper of how it affects our state. But with me saying that, I want to, and I think I brought it up maybe last board meeting, I want to see if there's a way for us to, we don't have to make a decision today, but just to start thinking about how to track complaints and flag them if the person feels that it was a complaint related to civil rights violations. Because I just want to see what that trend is for our state to make sure that if it is an increasing trend, that we adjust it, that we address it right away, considering our mission is to also protect the consumer. So that's a big one for me. I don't know if we've thought about that as we're rolling out the online complaint portal, but if there's a way for someone to select if they feel that that violation occurred as a result of a civil rights violation, I want to make sure we're collecting that data so that we can address it.
Yeah, and I will say, Ms. Robinson, also that is a topic that I think is one of the Monday topics for Aero, and so I'm really interested to kind of see what's happening on the national level and what other states are doing. So that might also give us some idea of how to address this, how to make sure that it's not that it is or isn't an issue in Texas, and how to address it.
So I wanted to throw that out there. That may be something that the enforcement committee takes up. That may be something that maybe we have an offline follow-up meeting with. But I just want to keep that out there because I know that that's something at some point we're going to need to really look at to make sure we're protecting our consumers on that end. But that's all I had on that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair and Stephanie, my committee would be happy to look into this issue. And my thought is that we could also maybe even develop a working group that would, I think the things you have kind of the broader view on that. Obviously, we want to address this issue, but we also need to look at what are the mechanics of this. How do we make these determinations as an agency? And I think we probably could get not only staff and board members, maybe other industry participants together to look at those issues.
Thank you.
I would volunteer to be part of that committee.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. That is great. In any way I can help, please let me know. But yeah, enforcement committee, if you can take the lead on that, and then, like I said, pull me if you need me, or however I can help, I'm happy to do that, research or whatever. And hey, the goal is if at the end of the day we find out that Texas is kicking butt and it's not an issue here in our state, great. And we can be the example for that. But if there is an issue, let's fix it so we can also be an example for that. So thank you very much for enforcement taking on that, and let me know how I can help. And thank you very much, Martha Gale, for helping us with that.
Absolutely.
I have a question. Do we know what types of complaints we get the most of?
Yes. And Melissa, correct me if I'm wrong, most of them are use pad violations.
Yep, most of the complaints we get consist of use pad violations. I think it's like over 70%.
Okay, because I think we should be looking at where the complaints are coming from and figure out if there is a way to lessen that complaint out there in the field. And not just the civil rights issues, which is very, very important, but any other issues that may be cropping up.
Also,
it's good for us as an agency. Sorry, go ahead, Ms. Martha Gale.
I'm sorry, but I was just saying, if it's one particular area in USPAP that continues to come up, that's key. But also, how significant is that one area? Is it something that really influences value and is fraud, or is it one of those check the box, the date was wrong? Something like that, because USPAP has numerous areas that you could violate by accident, and there are those areas that are significant.
Well,
So
Martha, I'll tell you, most of the complaints that we receive result in, most of them in dismissals, and a lot of those are contingent dismissals because of minor violations. And so, yeah, I think the staff's done a great job on addressing those types of issues. I mean, they're seeing it and recognizing those minor errors for what they are.
And that's a great point, and that's a great way to view the process. Thank you, Melissa. Hadn't always been that way.
Thank you very much. That answers a lot of my questions. Thanks.
And so sort of to bring that whole topic to a close, I just want to say that I want to make sure that even if we haven't had complaints in the past about any kind of discrimination, I think it's important for us as an agency to let the public know and license holders know that we are open to investigating that. If they, I don't want people to say, well, I didn't make the complaint because I don't think that people care. So if at a minimum, we make sure that the public knows that we are an agency that cares about those types of complaints and that we take them very seriously. So I think that's at minimum that we can do.
I'm not trying to put anybody on the spot here, but is there something in our rules or the statute that that fall under our jurisdiction that addresses this issue?
Well, doesn't USPAP says that it has bias as part of the rules in USPAP, correct?
Yeah, good point.
I'm asking Melissa, the non-appraiser here.
Yep, that would, for the bias complaints we get, they would be tracked under the ethics rule in USPAP. But just to let the board know, staff is actually attending a training put on by HUD on the 15th called Strategies for Investigating Discriminatory Appraisals. So
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Thank you guys for that.
Yeah, very good. Okay, I think we are now ready for Tony.
Good morning, Madam Chair, board members. Tony Slagle, Deputy Commissioner. I just want to touch base on the customer relation division, some highlights on that, and talk about where we are currently, just to give you an update. The material, what's in your materials is the June report. You have since received an updated, some updated numbers from me as of the beginning of this month for July, and they were trending better than the June numbers. However, we have, just so you're aware, we've lost about 6 people in the last quarter on the contact center. The contact center is one of those divisions that over the year and a half plus of the pandemic has performed better actually, while the staff's been remote than it has, not much, but they have performed better. But obviously you need persons in seats. So this loss of staff has been impactful to the numbers. We just to remind the board of funds 70% of one person for the contact center. The way that's set up is Robert has two individuals designated to answer that separate board line. But because it's not a whole person, they do also answer calls going to Trek as well. They're just prioritized to answer the board calls as they come in. So that's how that works. None of these people that have left have impacted that. None of the people that have left were designated to be on the board line. So that has not been an issue in terms of losing that people who are skilled enough to answer the board related questions, because they are a little bit more complicated than the questions that come in on the Trek side. I did want to give you an update on where we are for the month as of yesterday. We've received about a little over 1,000 calls. The contact center has handled on the first go around about just under 90% of those. About 12 of those were sent to other people to answer questions. The abandonment rate is just under 10%, and the hold time for the month so far is about 4 minutes and 40 seconds. Robert has, just to let you know, already hired people to replace those 6 individuals. In fact, we've overhired by 2. 4 of those people will start training on Monday, and the other 4 will start on September 1st. The thought of having an additional 2 people on there is to help with this current issue with people, with people leaving the contact center. We're also looking at ways to incentivize people, try to incentivize people more. A question was asked at the Trek meeting, and I just thought I would answer that now in case somebody has it. In terms of what we pay for those positions, we are at the high end of where the range is for state agencies. I think there's one agency that maybe is slightly higher, $50 a month or something like that. But just so you know, as of right now, we are at the high end of what other state agencies pay for contact center staff. So, and I've asked Robert of why people are leaving. There is not really any sort of reason, direct reason. It's not, none of it's based on finances. In fact, when he's told me when people have left the contact center to move to a higher paid position, it's within the agency. So we keep them on staff, we keep that expertise in the agency, we just lose them on the contact center. So I think that speaks well to what we're currently paying people for those positions. But as I said, we are looking for other ways to incentivize. We're also doing, always looking at a holistic approach to these issues. What can we do on other divisions that may be causing people to call us, that if we can answer those questions, provide more information online to people that so they don't have to call. So staff is sort of all hands on deck trying to figure out ways to minimize the reason for people to call, and which also impacts those numbers. I am happy to, the new, I missed this big point, the new staff that's been hired, the goal is to have them on the phones full-time on October 4th. So I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has about that. Robert's also on the call in case there's a question I don't know the answer to, he can answer that as well.
I will say, I'm glad that any people that are leaving, it's not due to finances. I've heard from friends in the private sector that they're losing employees due to, just being lured away with significant increases in salary that they, are having trouble competing with. So I'm glad to hear that. But we definitely, in this current environment with an employment shortage or a shortage of employees, of available employees, I want to make sure that we give the commissioner the tools that she needs to keep these people that we have spent money training. And so that's also obviously, Ms. Robinson, something we want to consider with the budget, but in this current environment, we don't want to continually have to retrain new people. So Commissioner, as that presents itself, please just let us know and let us give you the tools you need to make sure that happens.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I think between the pandemic depressing everyone and having to listen to complaints all day, I personally know that there's no amount of money that you could pay me to do that job. And I think we do have to consider the emotional effects that the pandemic has had on all of us. And, I would have given anything to get promoted or change to a different job so that I didn't have to listen to people yelling at me all day. So I think that is probably contributing to a lot of those people just getting really tired.
That's a really good point, Lisa, that the people that are in the positions that have to hear angry customers, that we need to consider that as, given the current climate outside of work.
Yes, ma'am. It's a difficult job. I did it between college and or undergrad and graduate school. It's a difficult job. So you've hit the nail on the head there. I think one of the things is that some people that were hired initially during the pandemic were people who lost other jobs. We had an opening, they came on, they performed, but as things started opening up again, they realized, I don't know if I want to sit on the phone for 8 hours, I'll go to something else. But again, we're really working hard to try to make sure that we're maintaining, not just maintaining staff, but maintaining good staff, good people who will provide excellent customer service, because it's you can pick up the phone quickly and answer calls, but you also need to be able to, when you get off the call, have the person be satisfied. And I think in general, our metrics show that people are satisfied with the service they're getting, even if they have to wait a little bit longer to get it. Not that it's acceptable that we're pushing up towards a 5-minute hold time, but it's remarkable with the staffing shortage we've currently had that we're able to maintain that. That speaks volumes to how Robert manages that division, and how it also speaks volumes to where we are now compared to where we were prior to, a couple of years ago, where we had a lot more people on the phones and 3 times that amount of hold time or length of hold time. So,
I think the job that you're doing is fabulous. I was just wondering, are you still doing the things you were doing before to uphold people's morale and the camaraderie and all of that, so we don't continue to lose people?
Yes, ma'am. I think in terms of what we can do based on the fact that we're remote, I'm happy to let Robert speak as well, but I know he checks in on his staff regularly. He talks to them. They have conversations about that. He and I meet every morning to talk about things, and one of the things we routinely talk about is how's your staff doing, and we've talked about ways to make sure that they're doing all right.
I think that's really important, right? You know, it's just been a long journey.
Yes, ma'am.
It has been. That's a very good point, Lisa. And I think the hope in this, first of all, the numbers are not just dire, right? We've seen dire numbers in the past. So we have slight increases here, but they're not dire. And I think he has done, Robert has done an amazing job considering the staffing issues he's encountered. And what's hopeful about all of this is for the past year, his team has shown amazing numbers under his leadership. And so we know that there is a structure in which has been created by his team and by his leadership that works, and that works really well. And so I think we just hit a bump. And as he gets those people trained and on the phones again, once he implements that structure again, I'm very hopeful that it's going to go back to the way that high performance, those high performance reports were going out. So that's the positive thing here, is that we know that our team has a strategy that actually works, because we've seen it over the past year. It's just, this has happened to be a little fluke that we're going to work through, but I totally expect for it to go back to how things were. So, but thank you guys for your hard work on that.
I generally sort of think Tony has this completely handled, and so I don't really dig into the numbers. So along those lines, Tony, what numbers would we be looking at, and what would indicate a code red for us as board members, so that we know when we need to start sounding the alarms?
Well, I would think, and I'll let Robert speak to this, things start to get a little sketchy if we start maintaining things over a monthly period of 5 minutes or more. 1 month of that, I think, is doable, as long as we circle back around and we're able to address that. We have a metric of a 1 minute hold time. We don't always meet that. It's usually between 1 and 2 minutes, which I still think is very, is very good. But yeah, as it starts to creep above 5 minutes, I would think that would engage us. Just so you know, one of the things that Chelsea and I have discussed with Robert and Denise as well, in terms of, I'm sorry, not Denise, Melissa, as well, in terms of licensing and the contact center, is looking at how our application numbers and our license numbers impact that. So to try to figure out if there's some sort of metric that would kickstart us to say, oh, it looks like we're trending in a certain direction, so we need to have 2 more people on the phone, or we need to have 1 more person in licensing to help process stuff, to try to get ahead of that curve before we come to you and say we're in a code red now. Because that's not the job we need to do, is to make sure we're managing that, so we don't have to come to you and say, oh, by the way, this is dire, we need help. So we are looking at ways to do that. I don't know if that answered your question. I hope it did.
Well, so it does. So you're saying the 5 minutes is on the average hold time, because the handle time is, I mean, as long as people are having a conversation, there's not frustration there, right? So we're really talking about just the average hold time before the call is answered.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Because
so 5 minutes, that would sort of be our code red. And where were we when we got into bad trouble?
I think we've been under, let's see, last month we were at 2 minutes and 3 seconds. The month before that we were 3 minutes and 18 seconds.
Tony,
where
yes, were we 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
Oh,
yeah, I
think
she's
asking?
talking like we were like 35, 40 minute hold
15 minutes, 20-minute hold times. Obviously, that is very unacceptable, and we don't want to get to a point where we're coming in, we're close to that. So that's why I'll be honest with you, 5 minutes was a number I threw out. I haven't really had that conversation with Robert and Chelsea, but I think it's a good threshold, because it gets us talking and having that conversation before we get to a point. Again, we're not doing our job if we're coming to you and saying we need help because we've got a 10-minute hold time. We need to nip that in the bud prior to getting to that point. So
I think,
and maybe y'all have internal conversations to determine what that code red is, or code orange, before we get to code red. So that's already sort of predetermined, not that we just go, we should be doing better, but like, this is where it's completely unacceptable.
And that's one of the,
we're reporting the same numbers in November, we need to examine why. And if we know the why, then we figure out how to keep it from happening. Right now, our why is that we're down staff. So once we are fully staffed, if that doesn't go down, we need to, something else is going on. Or if our turnover rate stays the same, then how are we going to address that? But we don't want to stay at 5 minutes. We want to get back down. So if we're not trending that direction, then that's where I think we raise red flags.
Chelsea, I'd like to commend all of you for keeping this in focus, because it has been 2 years and things have improved greatly. But the fact that this is something that is constantly monitored and is a huge improvement of what it was like before, where there was no concern about what the hold time was. And so I commend everybody on staff for doing that. I think that's, I really appreciate it. As an appraiser who routinely in years past would wait for an hour to talk to somebody, I think it's amazing now. The few times that I have had a need to call, it has been like lightning. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So can I ask, when we're looking at on page 34, the number of calls presented over the last 12 months, so it doesn't, there was a huge, a larger amount in July, the first month, but so I would assume on the Trek side, y'all are having a huge increase in licensees. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Even over the last 12 months. So
Yes,
the fact that those calls haven't, just kind of gone steadily up over the last 12 months is interesting to me, because I would imagine that most initial licensees on the Trek side probably pick up the phone at some point and have a question. Anything, just sort of what your thoughts are.
We've done a lot to encourage people to seek information online. One of the big things we were able to do is put information in terms of needed continuing education online, so people could go to that and seek what they need before they renew. Prior to that, there wasn't really a way to do it, and people had to call if they had any questions about it. Now they can go onto the website and look it up, and it's accurate, and they don't need to call us for that. So there's always this conversation about what can we do to give people information and reduce the reason to have to call us. Obviously, we want to be here for people if they have questions. We want to be able to give them this kind of service they need and answer their questions. But if they can get it online and they don't have to pick up the phone, that's even better. So that's what we've been doing on both the Trek and the board side over the last couple of years, is looking for ways to give people that information. I think that may be probably the main reason why why the numbers haven't gone up with the license numbers in terms of the phone calls.
Awesome. That shows a lot of efficiency, and probably in your determination of what code red is for average hold times, we probably also want to include response to email, like the % handled in a day that's on the next page. So, sort of all those metrics.
Yes, ma'am. We have metrics set that we shoot for. I agree with you. We need to have something that when it starts going below that by a certain percentage, it kicks us into. But again, this is a constant conversation that we're having, trying to make sure that we're on top of these things. And I appreciate everyone's kind words about the what staff has done, because I know they appreciate hearing that, because they really are working hard to make sure that these numbers stay the way they are.
I totally believe that, and I'm telling you, I think once that division staffs back up, we're going to be looking pretty good, just like we've been, because that system of processing has worked, and it's worked quite well. So I do think that staffing has a lot to do with it, but we're addressing it. So by November, I definitely see that we're going to be in a pretty good place.
I also want to comment because during this last 3 months in July, I renewed both my appraiser license and my my broker's license. And in both instances, I always have questions, and I love to talk to someone and get that one answer. And, you guys are great. Melissa, Jennifer, it's wonderful. And I'm not afraid to pick up that phone. And I'm one of those few people, nobody knows that I'm on the board, because I just get through and I ask my questions and I get them answered and I'm done. And then I had my broker's license overnight, and the appraiser license, it took maybe 24 hours. So we are doing so much right. And I hear it from my colleagues, and I'm so proud. I'm so proud, but you guys are the ones that make me so proud. But I just have to comment on that, and I'm happy to say it. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions for Tony or the Commissioner before we move on? Okay, we will move on to the next agenda item. Agenda item number 11. So just as a reminder to any public that is watching or listening, that these are rules that we discussed at the last board meeting, and they've been published in the Texas Register for public comment. We didn't receive any comment on them. As far as I know, please stop me, Dion or the Commissioner or Kat, if we did. So today they're before the board again for adoption. Generally, after they are adopted, the rules will become effective after 20 days after they're finally submitted to Texas Register. And I just like to remind the public about this so that they kind of understand the difference between the rules that are up for proposal and the rules that are up for adoption. And if they have questions or comments about them, that they understand the process so that they can get involved if they feel like they need to. I know before I became a board member, I didn't understand the process at all. And so I was not really able to kind of differentiate between the two. So agenda item number 11 is on page 57 in your materials. It's discussion and possible action to adopt amendments to Chapter 153 Texas Administrative Code 153.8 Scope of Practice. And I believe Ms. Tran will give us a summary on this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The first amendment up for adoption is to the scope of practice rule, and this amendment just increases the scope of practice for licensed residential appraisers from 250,000 to 400,000, and this is just based on change to federal law. Staff's recommendation is that the board adopt the amendments as published.
Does anybody have any questions? I am, okay. For the first time, I'm thinking of this question, and I apologize. Is it, okay, so that's for state licensed real estate. Okay, so that's just for licensed residential. We already changed the thresholds for the commercial, is that correct? Do we have that in rules?
No, so this is just a scope. So the scope of practice for this one is just for complex properties for the license.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. There's no there that doesn't relate on the other side. Okay, okay. I'm caught up on it. Does anybody else have any questions for Ms. Tran? If not, I will hear a motion.
Madam Chair, I move that staff is authorized on behalf of the board to submit for adoption amendments to 22 TAC 153 TAC 8 as published, along with any technical or substantive changes as required for adoption.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Bolton and a second by Mrs. Reed Lynch. Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Is anyone opposed? Motion passes. That takes us to agenda item number 11B, 153.21 Appraiser, Trainees, and Supervisory Appraisers. This is on page 61 in your materials. Mrs. Tran.
the second amendment up for adoption is an amendment to 153.21, and it just clarifies that only practice interrupting discipline, which impacts an appraiser's eligibility to supervise trainees. Staff recommends that the board adopt amendments as published.
Does anyone have any questions? If not, I will hear a motion.
Madam Chair, I move that, oh, go ahead.
No, you're on it.
All right, good. I move that staff is authorized on behalf of this board to submit for adoption amendments to 22 TAC 153.21 as published, along with any technical and non-substantive changes as required for adoption.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Castro and a second by Ms. Reed Lynch. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion passes. Agenda item number 12, as noted earlier, we are going to push that till later in the meeting if it's necessary. So that takes us to, is everybody good if we keep going for another little while before we take a break? Okay. This takes us to agenda item number 13. So as a reminder, these are the rules that are coming for the full board for the first time. So after we deliberate and discuss them, we may move to submit the rule for publication in the text register, and then that opens it up for a period of public comment. So at the next board meeting in November, we will consider any public comments that we receive, and that provides us with another opportunity to discuss further and make changes or submit it for final adoption. So these were, all rules are open to public comment, but these are sort of in that process at the moment. So agenda item number 13 is the discussion and possible action to propose amendments to 22 Texas Administrative Code 153-24 complaint processing. And this is on page 67 in your materials, and I believe Ms. Santos is going to give us a summary.
Good morning, Madam Chair, board members, Kathleen Santos, General Counsel, and the proposed amendments before you here. Mr. Bolton, you gave a good summary earlier in your discussion of the committee report on these amendments.
I appreciate that. I thought I did a really bad job.
I think it was, it was a bit of a spoiler alert from what I'm about to present now, but I think it was a good summary. So as Mr. Bolton, you mentioned that this amendments here would allow complaints for cases that result in contingent dismissals to be closed at the time when an agreement is reached, as opposed to when a respondent completes the remedial training. Ms. Robinson, you mentioned there is some concern about monitoring, making sure the respondents are completing the remedial training. Built into this process is a way to ensure that, and that is that if they fail to meet the deadline in completing the training, their license would be placed on inactive status until they would complete that training. And so staff's recommendation today is for these amendments to be proposed as presented. And I'm available for any questions.
Anybody have any questions for Ms. Santos?
Yes, Madam Chair, I just want to clarify. So will there be a separate report by staff that shows our group of folks that still need to complete those agreements? I just want to make sure I don't lose track of that. So I totally agree that it should not be included in the numbers for our closures, because it is kind of weird that we're including that, and it's not in our hands at that point. But so will there be a separate report or something, just so we continue to keep track of who still needs to complete that? That the board.
If we could ask Ms. Tran about how many are open at any one time, because I don't want to add another metric for staff to keep up with if it's something, and I hear what you're saying, and I totally agree with it. I just don't want to add something to this to-do list for staff if it's not really something there's a lot of people. Do you know what I mean? Like, so how many people would this be at any given moment?
Yeah. At any given moment, it's just a few at a time, but staff already does regular compliance reporting to make sure that any respondents that need to do any sort of training, it tracks deadlines for it. So we run those reports weekly already for internal purposes to make sure that we are keeping up with those.
Hey, Melissa, I have a question. How many or what percentage don't meet their deadline? I would imagine that that's a pretty small amount.
That's a very, very small amount. And normally if they don't meet their deadline, it's scheduling issues with the mentors or things like that. And we work with people on those things.
Okay. So you guys are on it in terms of, even if it's not on that open report, you guys are still on it, tracking it other ways to make sure those things are met. Okay. Yeah. Very good. Thank you very much.
So, Mr. Bolton, I just want to make sure that what Ms. Robinson is concerned about, that as far as enforcement, that y'all sort of keep an eye on that and make sure that that doesn't become an issue. Just keep it kind of on your radar in the enforcement committee.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, Melissa, if that's something that we could, when you give us the, our status reports in the committee meeting, if you'll just add that so that we know to stay on top of it.
Yep, I got it.
Thank you.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Okay, does anybody else have any questions for Ms. Santos or Ms. Tran? If not, I will hear a motion.
Madam Chair, I move that staff is authorized on behalf of the board to submit amendments to 22 TAC 153 TAC 24 as presented for publication and public comment to the Texas Register, along with any technical or non-substantive changes as required for proposal.
I second.
We have a motion by Mr. Bolton and a second by Ms. Robinson. Any further questions or discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion passes unanimously. That takes us to agenda item number 14, discussion and possible action to propose amendments to 22 Texas Administrative Code 159-204 complaint processing. Ms. Santos.
Yes, if you're, the amendments here should look very similar to the ones that we just went through, and that is because they are. The proposed amendments here apply to the rule for appraisal management companies, and they mirror the rule that we just previously went through. And again, it would allow complainants or allow a complaint that results in a contingent dismissal to be closed at the time when the agreement is reached between the parties, as opposed to when the remedial measures are completed. And again, it still has that inactive status component in place for this rule as well. And staff's recommendations here is to propose the amendment as presented.
I'm sorry, Ms. Santos. So what's the difference between this one and the other one? I apologize.
So the previous rule applies, is our complaint process for appraisers. This rule applies to appraisal management companies.
Oh, I see. Thank you.
Any further questions? If not, I will hear a motion.
Madam Chair, I move that staff is authorized on behalf of this board to submit amendments to 22 TAC 159.204 as presented for publication and public comment to the Texas Register, along with any technical or non-substantive changes as required for proposal.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Escalante Castillo and a second by Mr. Black. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. I think now would be a great time to take a short break before we tackle the second half of the agenda, if that works for everybody. So it's 11:28, so maybe at 11:35. So not quite 10 minutes, short break for coffee. And then we will be back here at 11:35. Does that work for everyone?
Perfect.
Okay, very good. We'll move on to agenda item number 15, pending business. This is an update regarding the recently passed evaluations bill. Mr. Slagle.
Yes, good morning, Madam Chair, board members, Tony Slagle, Deputy Commissioner for the record. This was a brief legislative update. As on your agenda, you'll see it's specifically regarding the evaluations bill, but I did want to, before we get to that, just mention that we are in our second special session. The first one ended on August 6th. The second was called the day after on August 7th. As of yesterday, the House now has a quorum, so I believe they're going to start taking up bills and business in hearings on Saturday, and then the House will reconvene on Monday. So just a little update on that. As of right now, there's not any bills that are really concern to the agency. We continue to monitor those to see if there will be. There aren't any on the call, so the likelihood of anything impacting the agency in any significant way is pretty slim, but we do continue to monitor those. There are a few property tax appraisal bills out there, but that obviously, while those may be concerned to some appraisers, don't have anything to really do with our jurisdiction as an agency. And then just briefly, I want to talk about two other bills before we get to the evaluations bill. One is the sunset bill. As of the last meeting, it wasn't official, but it is now. Our sunset date has been moved to 2031. So we're back on our 12-year cycle, which is very good news. And then the other bill that we were monitoring outside of the evaluations bill and specific to appraisers was HB 1939 by Reddy Smith, which was the statute of repose bill. That one also passed. Again, doesn't impact the agency in any way, but does have an impact on the appraiser population. It's essentially puts a statute of limitation on certain lawsuits filed against appraisers and appraisal review firms as well. And then finally, there's HB 2533 by Darby. That's the evaluations bill. Again, in some conversations with staff and also on the executive committee, there wasn't really any rule changes necessitated by this bill. We have posted some information on the website to help appraisers understand what the bill does. I believe the chair had a chance to review that as well before it went up. We've gotten a couple of inquiries from people who are duly licensed who seem to be confused somewhat about the difference between an evaluation and a broker price opinion. So we talked about having some sort of article or some other type of explanation on both the board and the TREC website that just explains that a little bit better, what the differences are when one is appropriate as opposed to the other, just to clear that up so people could have that at their fingertips should they need it. Again, there's no, as of right now, there's no rule changes necessitated by this. I will just say one thing that staff might like a little bit of guidance on from the board once you start your discussion on this is what, if anything, staff would need to do should we get a complaint about an evaluation that doesn't have the required disclaimer language on it. There's not really any direction in the statute with regard to what we should do with that. So, if there's any sort of indication or any direction the board would want to give, I think that would be welcomed as well.
Madam Chair, we'd be happy to take that up in our committee.
That was just about to be my recommendation, so I think that's great. Because I'd like for y'all to sort of dig into, was the intent to, mislead, and how do we differentiate between those two things if it was simply left off, but that the client understood what they were getting, all the minutia of that. So if y'all could dig into that, I think that would be great. And then we'll bring it back to the board level at some point and make sure everybody, understands and provide another opportunity for public input on that as well. Great. So I did notice that we announced in the June newsletter about the sunset bill, which I think is fantastic. It was just a line item in the newsletter as opposed to its own separate thing. And I don't know if that was intentional or I feel like it's something to be celebrated. It says a lot about, I think we got a lot of, I know you don't like to highlight, things that aren't so great. But there was so much attention put on the fact that we were only sunset for 5 or 6 years. So that might be something that we consider as an agency to highlight that and say, here are all the wonderful things that we've done and the changes that we've made, just to put that whole issue to bed.
Okay. I just as a quick reminder, there is still a reporting requirement as part of the sunset review process. We still have, I think, 2 years. I think it ends on 2023, where we have to annually report some numbers. So we're still involved in that and monitoring that. Just to let you know.
That might be something else that we highlight. That even though we got this reprieve, that doesn't mean that we're done. Making sure that we're on track.
Can we do a public posting, maybe with you, Madam Chair, speaking on that, or some quick interview where we, I I agree with you. That's a huge success from where we were, and the staff, has done an amazing job to get us there. So yeah, I mean, if, maybe even coming from you as a interview type thing.
Okay, yep, that sounds great. I will put that on my next topic for newsletter with help from the staff. Okay, any other questions for Tony? Before we move on to agenda item number 16, discussion and possible action regarding the fiscal year 2022 budget. So this is on page 81 in our board materials, but there's also a budget that was sent under separate cover just simply because it's in draft form. And so you received that in the email from Dion. It was a separate link, and there were 4 documents in there for us to look at. So page 81, but also the other document. And I will turn it over to the commissioner.
Fantastic. Okay, the document that is the proposed budget has the capital on the front, in case that is helpful to you. This is actually the second draft of the fiscal year 22 budget. It was included under separate cover. So this draft was reviewed by the budget committee and is offered for your consideration. The draft includes a revised budget that incorporates revenue projections based on the upcoming fee increase, which will go into effect January 1st, 2022. And in addition, we've made mention of this a few times during this meeting, but there have been several process efficiencies that we've implemented over the course of this current fiscal year that we intend to sustain. And that results in a lower overall operational cost for fiscal year 2022. As I mentioned, the budget committee reviewed this and they voted to recommend the second draft for adoption. I'm happy to answer any questions. I should also note that you'll see in the materials that there is a proposed budget for 2022, as well as a projected budget for 23 and 24. 23 and 24 is just for your information. The only thing that needs approval today is for the proposed 2022.
Does anybody have any questions for the commissioner or for Ms. Robinson? If not, then I will hear a motion.
Madam Chair, I move that the board approve the fiscal year 2022 budget as presented.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Black and a second by Mr. McAnally. Is there any other questions? Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes. Thank you to staff and the budget committee for getting that squared away. Okay, that takes us to the next agenda item number 17, discussion and possible action regarding the budget and investment policy. So this is also in that same document, and it's on page 83 of our board materials.
Madam Chair, I apologize. I was just disconnected from the call.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so for agenda item 17, fiscal year budget and investment policy. This policy has been reviewed by the budget committee and it's offered for your consideration today. The policy has been reformatted from the original version that you approved last year to make the entire document just more consistent and a more cohesive product. The only other change is to add section 2.10, the account balances and expenses. It includes a description of the education development reserve, which was not included in last year's policy. So the budget committee voted to recommend this policy for adoption.
Very good. Any questions for the commissioner or Ms. Robinson? If there are no questions, I will hear a motion.
It looks like Ms. Robinson is speaking, but her mic, you're muted.
I apologize, Madam Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
I move that the board adopts the budget and investment policy as presented.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Robinson and a second by Mr. Bolton. Any questions or discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion passes unanimously. To agenda item number 18, report on internal audit plan for fiscal year 2022. This is on page 85 of your materials.
And Madam Chair, I do apologize for interrupting. Just because I was disconnected slightly, I just wanted to confirm that item 16 for the budget was approved.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, agenda item 18, report on internal audit plan for fiscal year 2022. The commission approved the fiscal year 2022 audit plan last week, and it is in your materials on page 85, simply for your information. On page 89, you will see the specifics of the plan activities, and they include 2 audits, one for asset management, which will span both the board and the commission, and also accounting and finance for account reconciliations and cash forecasting. So these will be our focuses for this year, as well as some follow-up items and management of past audits. You do not need to vote to approve because that's something that the commission has done, but we wanted you to be fully aware of what the audit plan is for the year.
Very good. Does anybody have any questions for the commission? We appreciate Trek handling this.
Certainly.
Okay, that takes us to agenda item number 19, the discussion and possible action regarding recommendations from the executive committee regarding proposed amendments to the official record of the board meetings policy. This is on page 91 of your board materials. And there was also a draft document sent under separate cover, and it's under item number 19A.
Hello again, board members. Hello again, board members. So this item, as Chair Oates mentioned, this was brought before the executive committee as a way to further streamline our meetings. What this amendment to the board policy would do is to simply eliminate the board's ratification of the prior meetings minutes at the board meeting. So essentially item 5 of your agenda today. And as you can see in the materials that were sent under separate cover, we have the current policy with that act highlighted in yellow, and then there's the draft document that has that part eliminated. Everything else would operate the same way. Typically, the minutes are, Dion prepares the minutes, reviews our meetings, and we have a policy of having those records maintained with the bookmark video. Then they are approved by the secretary, Mr. Bolton, and then placed on the website. And then this act that would be eliminated by this amendment is, again, item 5 of the agenda of just the voting to ratify the minutes. So if that is still the desire of the board, or is the desire of the board to eliminate this part of the meeting, then it would require a motion to adopt those amendments.
So I know that typically most boards do, as part of a meeting, approve the minutes from the last meeting. And my only sort of hesitation on this one when it was first sort of brought up was that, when I came on as chair, it was helpful for me to be able to search for certain things in the board materials. So if I was looking for something related to evaluations or trainee audits or something, that I could search and they would be there. So my only that was really my only hesitation in not having it, done at the board level. I think that the secretary, approves it, and so that approval is taking place regardless. Those minutes are on the website, and they stay there for 5 to 10 years, and so I don't. So they're still available publicly for anybody that wants to see them. And the website is fantastic if you haven't seen it, where if you go to an agenda item, you can click on it and it will take you to that part of the meeting. And so it's super interactive and really easy to navigate. And so I feel like it's available publicly. It's being approved by the secretary. do we need this added step of approving it during every meeting? I can't recall a time that it's ever been not approved or that there have been changes to it. And so it sort of feels like an unnecessary step, but I would love to get any input from the board.
Madam Chair, I might add one thing, is that I'm already approving the minutes when they're completed. So it's just really a formalization of it, and it just delegates that final authority, which, as you said, we've never had any issue with them. And I can only think of one occasion where I made a change to the record.
Yeah, I was kind of curious why is this coming up? I mean, not that it's good or bad. Just doesn't seem like it's been an issue in the past. I was kind of curious why it's coming up. And then I actually have made, I believe, possibly one change, after flipping through. I mean, I'm not opposed to it. I was just, how did it come up to begin with?
Same question here.
I believe it was staff that kind of just identified ways of streamlining the meeting. There's this, I don't want to say ceremonial, but this exercise, this item that's always on the agenda meeting. And, if there's other mechanisms to make a change if there was, And so, again, this is just a means to kind of streamline that process and increase efficiencies.
Yeah, I will say, as you all have probably noticed, that I try and run the meetings in a way that, they don't last for 6 or 8 hours like they have, sometimes in the past. And I certainly don't want to cut out anything that provides for transparency or provides for, education for our license holders, that they understand what's going on. I don't want to cut it down so much that that we're leaving big items out, but anything like this, like Kat said, that's somewhat ceremonial, if we can cut that out, maybe it leaves us more time for more substantive discussions at the board level, which is really what I would like to see, as opposed to just sort of rote kind of procedures.
I'm a little torn on that. I actually do use that material as a refresher in preparing for each board meeting. And I do think that it is good to continue to put that in front of participants so that they know if they did not attend the prior board meeting, they still have the gist of what was discussed. So I don't know.
I'm fine with that. If there's anyone on the board that feels like it should be in there, then it's not something that is important enough to me to do away with.
I kind of have to agree with Stephanie. I like seeing it, and it doesn't really seem like it slows us down that much. I kind of like it as well, actually.
Yes,
I agree too.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion to table this agenda item.
Very good. I'm glad for the input. And we will continue to look for ways to increase efficiency and increase transparency. So this is just one of those items, but we will keep at it, and let's add things that I'm always open to all board members and members of the public to add anything to the agenda, or to take something out that doesn't make sense for us to spend time on. So thank you all for considering that. So we will move to agenda.
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
Before we leave this item, though, I would like to suggest if there's ideas for efficiencies, and I know we're just talking about the minutes, but on other agenda items that may be administerial, that may fall within the perfect guidelines of the agency, and staff has done most of the heavy lifting, it might, just as another idea, just be considered a consent agenda, or a consent item on the agenda. If you have more than just the minutes, you have several other items that a board member can read ahead of time and see that everything is in order and everything is okay. You can just do a consent item and just take care of a lot of other administrative items that go before the board as well. That's
a great suggestion. And so I think we'll put that on our agenda for the next executive committee to kind of take a look at that and see what we can put under that. Thank you for that suggestion, Mr. McAnally. Okay, that moves us to agenda item number 19B, the delegation of authority to consider and submit comments on exposure drafts issued by the Appraisal Standards Board and Appraiser Qualifications Board. This is on page 91 of our board materials and in the draft document sent under separate cover entitled 19B. And so this sort of came about because we get exposure drafts come sort of periodically throughout the year, and sometimes we don't have a board meeting that allows us the opportunity to write the comments and then go before the entire board to have them approved in time to submit them for the deadline. And so, you know, we sort of threw this around in the executive committee meeting. You know, do we want to speak as a board without the full board's consent? Probably not. Is this something that we could delegate to the committee level? Also, each of us individually can submit comments on anything as an individual person and not representing the board. And so I'll sort of turn it over to Ms. Santos to sort of explain what we came up with. And I'd love everyone's input on how you would like for us to speak as a board under limited timeframes.
Sure. So as Chair Oates mentioned, this was just a mechanism for the board to comment on these exposure drafts when, you know, the deadlines don't sync up with the exposure draft deadline. It's just sort of a way to remain nimble and for the chair to delegate that responsibility to an appropriate committee when it relates to a certain topic or a topical committee to submit those comments. And as in the materials that you were sent, you know, it's when it's just for those specific circumstances, if there's something of particular interest and also the deadlines don't add up or line up, then that's when that power could be delegated to a committee.
And so as a reminder, Ms. Santos, if we did submit comments in that way, would it be from the committee and not from the board?
Well, the way that the draft policy is outlined, it would be on behalf of the full board.
Kat, I have a question. What happens if somebody on the board that is being spoken for disagrees with what is being spoken?
Well, that's just where, you know, the push and pull of would it be your desire to have this policy in place, or would you prefer to have, you know, each of you as board members into your individual capacity could submit comments?
Could it not be from the committee? Because I like the idea of being able to speak for some part of the board if we don't have the time to get it in front of the full board, but I don't want it to speak for the full board if not everybody's had an opportunity for input. So I feel like the authority of it, if Ms. Robinson submits a letter and it's from the budget committee of the TALCB, I think that's probably gets us to where we're trying to be as an agency, saying we want to have input, but we're not going to speak for everybody who hasn't had an opportunity to have input.
Yeah, could each one of the committees have their authority to have a voice? And if somebody has an opposing, or another committee has an opposing position, or another individual on the board has an opposing position that they wish to share, then they can simply do so.
I would say, I would hope that none of us would ever submit any comments that we feel like someone else on the board would disagree with. And I'd like to, maybe as part of the policy, and maybe it's in there, but that the chair gets to delegate who is speaking. You know, budget committee isn't going to submit comments on AQB standards. You know, that just doesn't make sense. So perhaps that's the chair's authority to delegate that. But then also maybe the chair reads any comments after they're made to sort of make sure that it's not something that other board members might disagree with. Does that seem like a reasonable, and I don't expect for this to happen very often, we don't submit comments for every exposure draft or that all the different agencies do. This was just sort of like in the event that we really feel like we want to weigh in and we don't have time to get the full board. We don't have time to bring it before the full board, that we still have an opportunity to submit comments if we feel like it's important. Is that making sense, or does it seem like we're creating a problem where one doesn't exist?
I mean, it's making sense, but I also understand where Chance is coming from too. That's a tough one. So currently, when we respond to these, it's on behalf of the whole board. Is that correct? We have to wait until we all gather again?
Correct.
Yeah, and a lot of times we see that the board will delegate to the executive committee to make that response. But again, you're still having to wait for a board meeting to initiate that process.
Yeah,
To
that makes
initiate
sense.
the delegation.
Yes.
So this to me is more like not saying, okay, we want the education committee to do this at every meeting. It's more like if something comes up, we can allow the education committee if they want to submit a comment. If that makes sense. It's more like permission as opposed to a directive. So Kat, with the input that we have at this point, do you feel like the way that this policy memorandum is written is consistent with our discussion today, or do we feel like we might need to go back and?
I think, I don't want to make it seem like there needs to be a specific policy that needs to be adopted today. I think part of the issue is we don't have any control over when these exposure drafts come out, and then there are multiple versions, and so sometimes the topics can change. This was just sort of put forth as a, whether you wanted to establish a policy. If you did not, and you wanted to kind of take these as they come, and if it happens to where a committee meeting is taking place prior to a submission or a deadline, on behalf of the committee, there could be comments submitted, and it's sort of up to you. My concern is coming up with a policy that's sort of hard to really follow because of the complications of that, and or whether you want that additional eyes on it at the end of it after a committee's looked at it. I mean, I don't want to unnecessarily muddy the waters. So, I think today I'm not sure that what has been drafted fully encapsulates what you've all discussed, but again, I want to put it out there that there isn't a required policy that needs to be adopted today.
And this really came about because there was several exposure drafts on use cap changes, and we wanted to comment. As a board, we had submitted comments on the first exposure draft, and then I felt like, well, since we commented on that, it felt like the ASB kept completely changing topics on their use cap changes. So it was like, okay, even though we commented on the first exposure draft, this is a completely different one, but we don't have time now to submit comments. And so I wanted to make sure that we as an agency, I felt like it was important for us to make a comment, and we didn't have time. So that's why this came up. So I really want it to be more like, if a committee feels like they want to make a comment, that we give them that authority to comment on behalf of just the committee.
I think so, yes. I would love to see y'all do that. I think that executive committee should have the authority to, the question would be, do we need to, make it legalized with a motion here or not? But I mean, 100%, I think y'all should have that authority. That's the way I feel about it.
I love the idea of giving us the option to comment, because we don't want to miss the opportunity to speak and speak up when it's needed. I agree with what Chance is saying, though, is, what if someone on the board doesn't agree? But I guess if you frame it as coming from the education committee, then it's not representing the whole board.
Well, it's just a lot easier to call a committee meeting than it is a board meeting.
Right.
Right, that's true.
And I think if you delegate to the chair that they could, not grant the permission or whatever, if it was something like evaluations, as the chair, I would never say, I'm going to let one committee speak, about that, because I know that it's something that everybody feels passionate about. If it's the ASB and USPAP, I'm sure that there's a lot of board members that don't really care about that. So if we give that to education, not give it to them to do, but if they want, if they're requesting to do it, to give them the authority to do it, if that makes sense.
I don't see anything wrong with let's try it. If it doesn't work, we'll address it and tweak it until it does. But I think there's more good than bad that can come out of it.
Right. So probably Ms. Santos will go back and reword that to make sure that we have taken into consideration all the comments from the board today, and then maybe revisit it at the November meeting.
That sounds good to me.
Sounds good.
And just to emphasize also, if you individually feel passionate about a change that needs to happen in any of these exposure drafts, you can do it individually, and granted it won't have a backing of the board or anything like that, but you individually will have your voice heard with any comments that you make. So it's not that you're not going to get any voice at all. So that's the other good thing. And it's not, if you really feel passionate about it, go ahead and make your voice heard individually.
Great reminder.
Yeah, one question though, Kat, if let's say I have an opposing position, I want to make that known to the ASC. Can I identify myself as a board member saying, and I'm in opposition of the board policy or the board position that was presented?
Well, if you oppose it, I don't think that we should as a board ever speak if we're not speaking unanimously to that's just my personal opinion. I don't know if we ever have as an agency spoken when we didn't have unanimous. Is that any of you old timers know?
I'm thinking
Clayton
about
Black,
it.
I'm looking at you.
Well, I'm thinking about the fact that if you put a committee in charge to speak for the board, and as like Chance says, but he as an individual has an issue, he's also a board member. So how can we convey that it's a TALCB executive committee decision? Then, how does that look? How do you frame that all up? I understand what you're saying, Sarah, about getting unanimous consent. So that means the committee needs to fan it out to all the board members. And then I don't know how Kat feels about this, but there's a political subdivision that was chaining emails back and forth to each other, and they said, hold on, you're violating the Open Meetings Act now. Yeah. So, how do you thread the needle on this?
Well, my thought was not that the executive, I hear what you're saying, and I would not really want the executive committee to ever speak, because I think the executive committee it gives you the idea that you're speaking for the whole board. So I think if you're the budget committee or the education committee or something that's specific to that topic, then I think that better conveys we're just speaking for this committee of the board. Because I think, on the executive committee with me as chair, it makes it appear that I'm speaking for the whole board. So Chance, to your Chance, are you saying that possibly in this situation, the education committee, and then later you could come back and say, oh, I don't agree with that, and now I'm going to speak out.
Yeah, I don't want to silence somebody. I don't have a problem with the budget. With the committees taking on this task, and because it doesn't come up very often, and many times they're going to be the best equipped to make the response. But I also want to allow, if somebody feels passionately that that's the wrong direction, and then they should be allowed to say so. And I think they should be allowed to say so in their capacity as a board member, to say, I don't agree with the committee's position. And I think it's okay. In various issues, we disagree. It happens all the time. I'm just saying, if a certain committee says we think it should be one way, and a board member says, well, I disagree, they should be able to voice that opinion.
I see what you're saying. My thought is that this permission would never be granted if it was a topic that we feel like any board member could disagree.
I think it's fair enough.
I'm okay
in
with
those
saying
cases,
it
we
that
bring
way.
it to the full board.
Yeah, I'm okay with saying it that way, but what is the, what prevents us from just doing a poll, a email poll? Am I missing that?
That's deliberation as a board.
Oh, okay. Missed that.
Well, what if we don't do it together, but staff reaches out to each one of us and asks an opinion?
I think that might also be deliberation.
Okay, I give up.
So it sounds like this might not be something that everybody's on board for, and that's okay again. So maybe it's something that we just table the discussion, and if the situation arises again, we can revisit it.
We can do that. And also none of this prohibits a member of the industry of providing comments in their personal capacity. That's, at the Capitol at hearings, you have people in official positions who appear before a committee in their personal capacity, and they can use their title as a credential, but but then they're very express about saying, I'm not speaking on behalf of that group. I come to you in my personal capacity today. So there's still that tool available.
So I think that answers your question, Mr. Bolton, about if we can identify ourselves as board members and just say we're speaking on behalf of ourselves personally.
Yep, sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. All right.
Ooh.
Very good. So that will also be tabled. I like the robust discussion and the dissent. Okay, so that takes us to, where are we? Agenda item number 20?
Yes.
Discussion and possible action regarding amendments to the TREC and TALC Memorandum of Understanding, page 93 in your board materials. And there is also a draft document entitled item 20 that was sent under separate cover. And I believe Ms. Santos is going to introduce this item.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. The memorandum of understanding before you today specifies the cost allocation and services and employees between TREC and TALCB, as well as the performance review of the commissioner. And this is an agreement between the two agencies that is renewed and approved every 2 years. The proposed changes from last year to this year are, again, as Chair mentioned, they're sent under separate cover as item number 20. These changes are minor to the agreement. They just reflect the structural changes to TALCB, changes in title. One thing that was in addition is a cost allocation sheet that was prepared by our Finance Services Division, clarifying the cost allocation between the two agencies. And this agreement was already approved by TREC at their last meeting. Staff's recommendations here is to adopt the amendments to the MOU as presented, along with any technical or non-substantive changes. And I'm available.
Does anybody have any questions?
Were there any major cost allocation differences from what we've done in the past?
No, ma'am. The additional sheet was just to sort of add additional definitions of what those allocations mean.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I move that the board adopt the amendments to MOU between TALCB and TREC as presented.
A second.
We have a motion by Mr. Bolton and a second by Ms. Robinson. Any other questions or discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes. That takes us to agenda item number 21, which is the discussion and possible action regarding topics for the November training workshop. So in the past, we've sort of narrowed it down to the use pack class that Ms. Reed Lynch was working on for us. I sort of want to revisit that if that's something that you're still wanting to do, Martha Gale. And the only reason that I'm asking about it again is because I know that you haven't had the opportunity to be part of a PIC review process. And I think that the idea of the use pack class was really to kind of get open up a discussion between enforcement staff and board members to kind of talk about USPAP, because we felt like in the past that they were interpreting it differently than we were interpreting it. I don't know that I feel that same way, anymore now that I've had an opportunity to be part of the PIC process. So I'm wondering if your opinion might change when that happens for you as well. But I wanted to get your temperature on doing the USPAP class in November.
Well, I really thought that it was important at the time we discussed it. There were several issues, but it appears to me now that it's being handled in a better way. Maybe the understanding is better, but I still don't disagree with having the board, maybe not this time because we have had one in the past, but maybe having the board go through an abbreviated USPAP class or explanations of USPAP. What is significant, what's not significant, and particular instructors do that. They can streamline it. It doesn't have to be the boring USPAP class we have, but I think it zeroes in on what the meat of the class. And so that's why I submitted that, one of the reasons, other than the one that I think that everything's being handled better, period. But maybe this is not the time.
So I'd like to know from the public members, does this seem like something that you've always sort of had a question about and would like to know more about it? We sort of in the industry call it like our Bible, because it's, the thing that we all go to and look to.
I definitely, as a public member, think that we should cover it at a high level for sure, for our sake. I don't think drilling down is necessary, but if we cover it at a high level and then give the public members additional resources if they want to go deeper, I think maybe helpful. And Lisa, I know you went through the last workshop training, so you may have thoughts on that as well.
The other thing is we haven't talked to the instructor, Sarah, in quite some time. I mean, I don't even know what his availability is. So do you want me to reach out and do that?
Yes, ma'am. So the date that we have tentatively set for the workshop, and I think it's pretty set in stone at this point, is November 4th. So if you'll make sure that he can be available either, I would say probably for a half day, maybe 3 hours in the morning. Does that sound like
I agree with that.
Or 3 hours in the afternoon. We can.
Martha, you gonna make me take USPAP twice this year?
You're going to get credit for it, I'm
a very high level.
What are we
Very
going to
high
do with
level
credit, Martha?
And I think it would be more of a summary.
Summary. That's a good way to look at it.
Not just for appraisers but what's important and what's not. That was my theory.
Yeah.
I'm sure Lisa wants to take this. I'm just positive she does.
Lisa.
I agree with everything that Stephanie said. It'll be very useful to me.
3 hours, I think, is sufficient.
I agree with that too.
Yeah.
And so then the other half of the day, we'll probably just do refreshers on Open Meetings Act, walking quorums, that sort of thing. Does that sound reasonable? And is there anything else that anybody, and today's discussion isn't final by any means, if there's anything that comes up between now and then that you would like to cover, or that you think about a question specifically that you want to make sure is covered, then always you can reach out to me or to staff to make sure that it's covered. Does that sound like a pretty good plan of action for the workshop?
Yeah, yeah, and if you guys haven't had a chance, Dion sent the previous list of topics, and it's really good. I mean, that if you take a look at that, that'll give us some ideas too that we can pull from. Should we email them to Kat as we think of things, or what's the appropriate way to do that?
I'm happy to receive those emails.
Okay. So I just so yeah, but yeah, it's like several years of what we've covered, and so that may be good to look at too.
Yeah, absolutely. So between now and November 4th, well, give Kat a few days before November 4th. But you can submit any ideas or questions that you want covered at that time. Okay, very good. Anything else that we need to discuss on that agenda item? Commissioner Kat, we're good.
One thing, just depending on, would this be online as well? If just saying, if that's gonna be a thing that happens if we do not, if we extend this, the online meeting, will this workshop be also online or would it be on site is my question.
Oh, that's a good question. So you're saying if we end up going back to virtual, will we have this? Yeah, I think
Correct.
That's going to be a game time decision probably. I don't anticipate that it will be virtual. I don't anticipate that the governor is going to extend that permission. I mean, that's just my guess, but that's probably going to have to be a game time decision, huh?
And then if we are in person, if we have to have, I don't know, certain, PPEs, take precautions for keeping everyone comfortable and safe. But yeah, hopefully we can be in person for it.
Yeah, I think to me, a workshop is more a time when you kind of be a little less formal and have real good conversations. And that's definitely a lot easier when you're in person.
Yep.
Is there any reason why if this were to happen, that we're in the same situation we're in now, is there any reason why we couldn't change that to the February or January meeting and have the workshop then just move it on? It makes more sense to me.
That would be my preference as opposed to having it virtual to move it to February.
Yeah,
I agree.
definitely.
I agree.
Do we
Okay.
have a limitation on when we have to have it by that date? No? Yeah,
I don't think so.
definitely more effective in person.
There is something about training, isn't it? But I think it's before you're, and Ms. Santos, if you'll correct me if I'm wrong, is there something in the statute about board member training?
Something about annual training,
Yeah.
but I think that in this condition, I think it's just like airplane tickets. No, you can cancel.
Correct, Manager. There is our statutory required training. If you recall last year's training, I tried to keep that very brief to, the materials that is statutorily required or what we've had based on our policy. And so, I kind of anticipate that we'll be in person, but if it starts looking like that will not be the case, then we'll try to adjust accordingly.
Okay. So if it is required statutorily, then we will do it in whatever way we need to do it and maybe condense it to just cover the topics that need to be covered and wait until February to have a more robust conversation about anything else we want to talk about. That sound like a plan for everybody?
Yep, sounds good.
Fantastic. Okay. Agenda item number 22 is discussion and possible action regarding agenda items for future meetings. And I think Ms. Santos, you might have had something for us on this.
Yes, ma'am. One of the things that's coming up is the quadrennial rule review. And some of you might be familiar with it, some of you haven't. This will be the first quadrennial rule review for me, but every 4 years, each state agency must generally review and consider their rules for readoption no later than the 4th anniversary of when it takes effect, and then every 4 years after that. And so we are coming up upon the 4 years for our rules. And it's a similar process to how we've proposed rules, our typical rules, but historically, this board has taken this review process over the course of a year where, we'll open up a few chapters, review it, and readopt if they're still necessary. And then, again, the next several meetings, open and close chapters. And so November will be the beginning of that process.
And that happens at the board level?
Correct.
Is there any part of that process that we can delegate to the committee level?
It looks and feels a little bit like your normal rule proposal and adoption process. It's just for a different purpose. So you can yes, you could assign things to committees before it went to the full board.
Sarah, it's my recollection that when we did this the last time, that's exactly what we did. Is the committees took up the rules, and the staff made recommendations as to any changes or eliminations, and then we came up with a proposal or a proposal based on that in our discussion.
Okay. So my thought here is that if we do it in bulk at the board level, then we probably aren't going to dig into it. There might be some areas where we don't need to dig in. And so I don't want to, reinvent the wheel, but I also want to take the process seriously and really consider, why do they make us do this? And let's take that opportunity to do what it is that they're, that the intent is. So however we can, present that, let's do that. Without bogging down the committees. And that might mean that we might need the committees to meet twice between now and November. Well, wait, you're saying, Kat, that we don't open everything up at once. It's little section by section.
That's correct.
Okay. So if there are over the next year or so, if there are times that committees might need to meet twice, if there's a heavy load, between board meetings, then that might be how we tackle it as well. Am I on the right track on this? Does it seem like?
I'm definitely open to it for our committee. Yeah.
So obviously education is education, and licensing and anything administrative comes to executive. I would assume budget, obviously, right? Just sort of split it like that. Sound good?
It does.
Okay. We've got our work cut out for us. Very good.
Okay.
Anything else for future agenda items? Okay, very good. And that takes us to discussion and possible action regarding future meeting dates. So the calendars are on the very last page of your meeting materials. And so we previously had set a date of November 4th and 5th for the next meeting and workshop. So just want to make sure, confirm with everyone that date works. I will assume it does unless I hear something. Okay, and then we can also set a tentative date for the February board meeting. So if you'll look at that February 2022 calendar, and I will point out that on the February 14th and 15th are TREC meeting dates. So probably the 11th and 18th would be a little difficult. I don't want to put that on staff. So maybe either the 4th or the 25th of February.
I prefer the 24th and 25th. Or 25th.
I agree.
Agreed.
Everybody? Okay. So let's put that tentatively on our calendars, and if anything comes up, you'll let staff know so we can change it, February 25th.
We might also ask if are any problems moving the meetings from 10 a.m. to 9 a.m. I don't know, but we thought this one would have been a real quick one. And it was quick. It was quick, but still.
Okay.
Flights are so weird now about, I have connections all over the world. And so I might be in the airport flying for 9 hours to get to El Paso, which is crazy.
I'm perfectly fine with that, Martha. Anything that will help you out, I understand. I mean, it doesn't affect me either way, but if it does you, it's fine with me.
So
Okay,
I think in the past it was moved to 10 because Mr. Jeffries was in Georgetown and that gave him time to get into Austin. So, but now either everybody's flying in and staying the night before, or we're local in Austin. So we don't have that same conflict. I know for staff that's, 9 a.m. is a little bit earlier and makes it a little more difficult, but if it helps everybody to kind of get back out, on flights, then hopefully that's something that we can do. So 9 a.m. So we will do 9 a.m. on February.
I did want to I did want to say that 9 a.m. when we meet in person is great. But if it's 9 a.m. on Zoom, that means I got to be at the computer at 8 a.m. So I would prefer if it's Zoom that we keep it at 10 or your 10 or 9. And when it's live in person, then we'll do it at 9.
Does that
Is
work
that
for
okay?
everybody? Then you don't have a flight to consider. That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. So would 9 o'clock apply for the November as well, or, well, it's 4th and 5th, so it doesn't really matter that
So,
much.
well, on
Well,
the,
it does, 9 a.m. is 9 a.m., whether it's the 4th or the 25th.
Yeah.
so let's, for the workshop on the 4th, let's sort of, once Kat and I figure out the exact schedule and what we're going to do, we'll either do 9 or 10. If we can do 10.
Yeah,
then,
the workshop doesn't matter.
right.
I mean,
Yeah, right.
we're all here.
And then on the 5th, we will schedule that for 9 a.m. So the 4th is tentative.
10 is fine.
9 or 10, and the
Whatever.
5th is 9 a.m. Does that work for everybody?
Fine with me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very good.
Sounds good.
Okay, so that takes us to the last item. So I just wanted to thank everybody, obviously all the board members for being flexible again about, today's meeting, and staff are working hard to prepare for this, but also all meetings that staff prepares, for. So like I mentioned earlier, the open meetings waiver expires in September. So most likely we will be in person in November. And that will be the first time that we will have laid eyes on some of you in quite some time, seeing the whites of your eyes, as the commissioner says. So until then, the time is 12:36 p.m. and this meeting is adjourned.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
meeting.
Staff.
Thanks, everyone.